The air in the house had changed. It was no longer the familiar atmosphere of sawdust, graphite, and old books that had defined Alara's 18 years of life. That scent, her grandfather's scent, had been scrubbed away, replaced by the sharp, sterile smell of lemon polish and the faint, cloying aroma of his sister's floral perfume. Alara stood in the hallway, her hand resting on the cool, smooth wood of the doorframe leading to the workshop, a room she was no longer permitted to enter. Her great-aunt, a woman whose name was technically family, but whose presence felt like an invasion, had locked it the day after the funeral. Alara was 18, an age that was supposed to signify the beginning of a life, but for her, it felt like an ending. Her grandfather, a master stonemason and surveyor, a man whose hands were maps of hard work and whose heart was a fortress of love and competence, was gone. He had been her entire world since her parents' death a decade prior. He had not raised her with soft words or coddling gestures, but with lessons. He taught her how to read the grain of wood, how to true a stone with an adze, how to calculate the load-bearing capacity of a beam. He taught her that the world could be understood and, to some extent, controlled through skill, patience, and an unwavering respect for the materials at hand. Her uncle, her grandfather's only son, arrived 2 weeks after the earth had settled over the grave. He was a man from the city, soft in a way her grandfather never was, with clean hands and a gaze that appraised everything for its monetary value. He did not see a home filled with memory. He saw an asset. He did not see his niece, a young woman hollowed out by grief. He saw a complication. The conversation, when it finally happened, was not a conversation at all. It was an announcement, delivered in the newly polished living room where the dust motes no longer danced in the sunbeams. "The house has been sold, Alara," her uncle said, his tone flat and administrative. He did not look at her, focusing instead on a small smudge on the polished tabletop. "The new owners take possession at the end of the week. You'll need to be out by Friday." She did not cry. She did not plead. The lessons of her grandfather ran deeper than that. You did not waste energy on an immovable object. You assessed, you planned, and you acted. Her grief was a cold, heavy stone in her stomach, too dense for tears. She simply nodded, her gaze fixed on the wall behind him, on the faint outline where a framed blueprint of a covered bridge had hung for 20 years. Her uncle had already taken it down. "Your grandfather left no specific provisions for you in the will," he continued, finally sliding an envelope across the table. It was thin. "I've been appointed executor. This is a final settlement from the estate, a gesture of goodwill. It should be enough to get you started somewhere." She picked it up. Inside were 2 $100 bills, a paltry, insulting sum. $200 to erase 18 years of life, of love, of apprenticeship. It was not a gesture of goodwill. It was a dismissal. It was the price of her being made to disappear. "Thank you," she said, the words tasting like ash. The quiet formality of it seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. He finally met her eyes, and for a fleeting moment she saw a flicker of something. Shame, perhaps, or just the discomfort of a man unaccustomed to the consequences of his own quiet cruelties. Then it was gone, buried under a lifetime of practiced detachment. That night, Alara did not sleep. She sat on her bed, the $200 lying flat on her bedside table. Her only other possession of true value lay in her lap. It was her grandfather's plumb bob. It was not a decorative piece, but a tool, heavy and dense, turned from a solid piece of brass. Its surface was a geography of tiny nicks and scratches, each a story of a wall raised, a foundation squared, a bridge aligned. Its point was still perfectly sharp. He had given it to her on her 16th birthday. "Gravity never lies, Alara," he had told her, his voice a low rumble. "It is the truest thing in the world. If you can find the vertical, you can always build from there." It was his compass, his moral code, made tangible and heavy in her hand. It represented the mentor's guidance, his unwavering truth, and what she knew to be her true self. Before dawn, she packed. It did not take long. She had a single canvas satchel. Into it went a change of sturdy clothes, a whetstone, a small hand-forged hatchet, a spool of waxed thread, and her grandfather's drafting kit, pencils, a compass, and a small, worn vernier scale. She wrapped the brass plumb bob in an oilcloth and placed it in the very bottom, a dense anchor of purpose. She took the $200, but left everything else. The furniture, the books, the memories. They belonged to the house, and the house was no longer hers. She walked out the back door as the first pale light of dawn touched the sky, and she did not look back. She walked for 3 days, following old service roads that wound their way out of the gentle, populated valleys and up into the harsh, forgotten territory of the high desert mountains. This was a land her grandfather had spoken of with a kind of gruff reverence, a place of stark beauty and unforgiving geology. The air grew thin and sharp, smelling of pine resin and dry dust. Her money was a constant, worrying weight in her pocket. She spent little, buying bread and cheese that she ate on the move, sleeping rolled in her blanket under the vast, star-dusted sky. She was not running from something. She was moving toward an unknown. She was adrift, but she had her tools, and in the quiet determination that settled over her, she began to feel less like a victim and more like a surveyor of her own desolate future. On the 4th day, she arrived in a small, dusty town that served as the county seat. It was little more than a single street with a courthouse, a general store, and a blacksmith's shop, all huddled together as if for warmth against the vast emptiness of the surrounding landscape. It was in the general store, while buying a small sack of oats, that she overheard the conversation. 2 old men in worn denim leaned against the counter, talking to the proprietor. "They're finally selling off the old Sulphur Springs place," one of the men said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into a brass spittoon. "County's taking it for back taxes. $1. Can you believe it? $1 for that whole pile of rocks." The other man chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "It ain't worth $1. Place is cursed. Silas Blackwood poured his whole life into it and died broke and alone. They say his ghost still rattles around up there, guarding his folly." The proprietor, a woman with a weary but kind face, just shook her head. "It's a shame. My grandmother used to say the waters there were something special. Healing, she called them. But that was before the roof caved in. Now it's just a hazard." Alara listened, her heart giving a strange, quiet thump. A pile of rocks, a collapsed roof, a folly. To the men, it was a joke. To her, it sounded like a foundation. It sounded like work. It sounded like a place where a person could start from the vertical. She finished her purchase, her mind racing. $1. She had 200 of them. She went directly to the county courthouse. It was a squat stone building that smelled of old paper and stale coffee. The clerk was a paunchy man with a bored expression, leaning back in his chair with his feet on his desk. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her dusty clothes and the determined set of her jaw. "Can I help you?" he asked, not bothering to move. "I'd like to buy the old Sulphur Springs Bathhouse property," Alara said, her voice steady. The clerk's feet hit the floor with a thud. He stared at her for a long moment, then burst out laughing. It was a loud, braying laugh that echoed in the quiet hall. "You in what army, girl? That place is a death trap." "I have the $1, she said, pulling one of her precious bills from her pocket and laying it on the counter. His laughter died in his throat. He saw that she was serious. A slow, mocking smile spread across his face. "Well, I'll be," he drawled, taking the bill. "You want to buy a pile of rubble and a ghost? It's no skin off my nose. The county's just glad to have it off the books." He shuffled through a stack of papers, pulled out a deed, and began to fill it out with a flourish, as if the transaction were the most amusing thing to happen all year. He asked for her name, writing Alara Vance in a looping script. "There you go, Miss Vance," he said, sliding the paper toward her. He hadn't even bothered to make change for the 100. "You are now the proud owner of 1 acre of prime wasteland, and the finest collection of collapsed masonry in this county. Don't come crying to me when you fall through the floor and break your neck." She took the deed, folded it carefully, and placed it in her satchel. She did not grace his mockery with a response. She simply turned and walked out, the man's quiet snickering following her down the hall. Outside, the sun was bright, the air was clean, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker, not of hope, but of grim, solid purpose. She owned something. It might be worthless, but it was hers. The hike to the property took another 2 hours, climbing a steep, winding trail up a narrow canyon. The faint smell of sulfur grew stronger, a mineral tang on the wind. She heard the place before she saw it, the gentle, constant sound of running water. Then she rounded a bend, and her stomach clenched. It was so much worse than she had imagined. The main structure was a skeleton. The central roof had pancaked inward, a chaotic jumble of splintered rafters and heavy, slate-like tiles. One of the grand stone arches that must have once formed the entrance had crumbled, its voussoirs scattered like the bones of some great beast. Walls of beautiful, dark granite stood in jagged sections, open to the sky. Moss and tenacious mountain weeds grew over everything. It was a scene of profound decay, a monument to failure. A wave of despair, cold and sharp, washed over her. The clerk's mocking laughter echoed in her ears. What had she done? She had traded a fortune, her fortune, for a tomb. She forced the feeling down. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind, a low and steadying rumble. "First, assess. Don't let the whole picture scare you. Look at the parts." She took a deep breath, the sulfurous air stinging her lungs, and began to walk the perimeter, methodically, like a surveyor. She saw not just ruin, but evidence of incredible skill. The stones that remained were perfectly cut and fitted, the mortar joints paper-thin. This Silas Blackwood, he had been a master. He had loved his work. This was no slapdash construction. It was a cathedral brought low. As she moved around the back, she found a smaller, secondary wing that was largely intact. Its roof was a simple, shallow pitch, and it had been protected from the main collapse by a thick interior wall. The windows were shattered and the door was gone, but the 4 walls and the roof stood firm. Perhaps it had been a series of changing rooms, or an office. It was small, but it was shelter. It was a start. For the next week, she worked from dawn until dusk. She used her hatchet to clear the tangled brush from the entrance of the small wing. She swept out years of accumulated dirt, leaves, and animal nests. She found old canvas tarps in a collapsed shed and used them to cover the empty window frames, creating a dim but protected space. She built a small, efficient fire pit outside, lining it with stones from the rubble. She was creating a base camp in the heart of her own ruin. The physical labor was a balm, each completed task a small victory against the overwhelming despair. Her focus narrowed to the heart of the bathhouse, the spring itself. It bubbled up from the ground in the center of the main, ruined chamber, flowing into what was once a large, stone-lined basin. The basin was now choked with rubble, fallen beams, and silt. The water, clear and strangely warm, found its way through the debris and trickled out a breach in the basin wall, carving a small, muddy channel across the floor. She began the monumental task of clearing the basin. It was back-breaking work. She used a fallen rafter as a lever, slowly prying out the heavy, waterlogged timbers. She hauled stones out one by one, her muscles screaming in protest. As she cleared the debris, the flow of the spring increased, the water pooling deeper and clearer, and as the silt washed away from the basin floor, she saw it. Most of the floor was made of rough, functional flagstones. But in the very center, directly where the spring bubbled up, was a single, massive slab of granite. It was different from the others. It was a lighter color, almost white, and it was cut with a precision that was breathtaking. Its edges were perfectly square, its surface impossibly smooth. It did not seem to be a stone meant for a floor. It felt intentional. As she ran her hand over its surface, she could feel a faint, low-frequency vibration, a hum that seemed to travel up her arm. It was the hum of the earth, concentrated. The spring water flowed over it, making the golden flecks of mica within the stone glitter like a submerged constellation. This was the anomaly. This was the part that didn't fit. For 2 days, she studied the stone. She used her grandfather's scale to measure it, her compass to check its orientation. It was perfectly aligned with magnetic north. It was not a random piece of geology. It was a key. Silas Blackwood, the master mason, had placed it here for a reason. And she, the apprentice mason, knew in her bones that it was meant to be moved. Getting it to shift was the hardest work she had ever done. She found the longest, strongest pry bar she could salvage from the wreckage, and spent a full day chipping away at the ancient mortar, sealing the stone's edges. She worked by the light of her small fire, her shadow dancing on the ruined walls. Finally, she found purchase in a small crack. She put all of her weight on the bar. The stone groaned, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to come from the bedrock itself. She repositioned the bar, using a smaller stone as a fulcrum. She pushed again, her muscles straining, sweat dripping into her eyes. Slowly, agonizingly, the great slab tilted. It moved with a smoothness that defied its immense weight, pivoting on a hidden, masterfully designed fulcrum point. As it rose, it revealed not earth, but a dark, square opening. The air that rose from the hole was cool, dry, and smelled of deep stone and time. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had been right. She secured the tilted slab with a sturdy timber, then lit her small oil lantern and lowered it into the darkness. The light fell upon a short flight of steep, expertly cut stone steps. They were clean and dry. Taking a deep breath, she descended. The shaft opened into a small, man-sized chamber, no bigger than a closet, lined with the same perfectly fitted granite. And in the center of the chamber sat 2 chests. They were not treasure chests from a storybook, but practical, heavy things, made of dark wood and bound with thick straps of blackened iron. They were sealed not against thieves, but against time and damp. With trembling hands, she worked the simple but strong latch on the first chest. The lid creaked open. Her lantern light fell upon a sight that made her gasp. Gold. It was filled with gold coins, not neatly stacked, but poured in like grain, a cascade of muted, heavy yellow. It was a fortune beyond comprehension, a king's ransom hidden beneath a pauper's ruin. For a long moment, she could only stare, her mind unable to process the scale of it. This was the source of the rumors, the truth behind the ghost stories. This was Silas Blackwood's secret. She closed the lid, her hands shaking. It was too much. The second chest was smaller. She opened it. It did not contain gold. It contained a single, thick, leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with elegant, spidery script. She took the ledger back up to her small, makeshift room. By the flickering light of her lantern, she began to read. The book was the journal of Silas Blackwood, dated a century before. His story, written in the precise, methodical language of an engineer, unfolded on the pages. He had been a successful architect in a burgeoning eastern city until he was betrayed. His business partner, a man he had trusted like a brother, had falsified documents, stolen his designs, and accused him of fraud. Silas was ruined, his name disgraced, his career destroyed, section. He had not fought. Like Alara, he had simply walked away, taking with him only his tools and the small amount of money he had left. He had traveled west, a man hollowed out by injustice, and found these sulfur springs. Here, in the solitude of the mountains, he had decided to build one last, perfect thing, a monument not to his ego, but to his craft, the bathhouse. While digging the foundations for the main basin, he had struck a vein of placer gold, a rich, forgotten deposit washed down from the high peaks. It was this discovery that funded his grand project. He had used some of it to build, and hidden the rest. The last entry, dated the year of his death, was written in a shakier hand, but the words were clear and strong. "I am an old man now," he wrote. "The work is done. This place was my sanctuary, but I have no heir to leave it to. The world that cast me out has forgotten me, and I have forgotten it. But this gold, this heavy, useless metal, remains. It is a burden. I leave it not to chance, but to competence. I have set a lock that only a fellow craftsman can see, and a key that only a true builder can turn. If you are reading this, then you are that person. The ruin above is a test. The fortune below is a tool. Do not worship it. Use it. Restore this place. It is a place of healing, and the world has too few of those. Build a life of peace and purpose. That is my only request. The rest, the stone, the water, the gold, it is all yours. A blessing from one outcast to another." Alara closed the book, and for the first time since her grandfather's death, she wept. They were not tears of grief or despair, but of profound, aching kinship. She was not alone. 100 years ago, a man she had never met had walked her same path. He had felt her same loss, her same quiet determination. He had not left her a curse. He had left her an inheritance. A true inheritance, not of blood, but of spirit. The next morning, the world looked different. The ruin was no longer a symbol of failure, but a canvas of possibility. The gold was not a treasure to be hoarded, but a resource to be wielded. The work that lay ahead was no longer a burden, but a purpose. Silas Blackwood had given her a map and a mission. Her first act was to buy a mule. She walked back to the town, her steps light. She found a man selling a sturdy, gentle beast he called Otis. She paid his price in cash, without haggling, from the money her uncle had given her. It felt right to start this new chapter by spending the last of the old one. With Otis to help her, the work accelerated. She became a familiar, if strange, sight to the people of the small town. A young woman, alone, buying bewildering quantities of supplies: rope, pulleys, canvas, nails, sacks of lime for mortar, dried beans, flour. She paid for everything with small amounts of cash, never flashing the gold that lay hidden beneath the spring. The proprietor of the general store, a practical widow named Maeve, watched her with a curious, assessing eye. She saw the calluses on Alara's hands, the clarity in her gaze, the deliberate way she selected her goods. This was not a flighty girl on a foolish venture. This was a serious person. Maeve began setting aside the best supplies for her, offering a quiet nod of respect instead of questions. Alara's first major project was the roof of the small wing that served as her home. She needed new timbers. For that, she needed to visit the blacksmith. The smithy was at the edge of town, a dark, cavernous space that rang with the rhythmic clang of a hammer. The blacksmith was a man named Cormac, broad-shouldered and bearded, with arms as thick as posts. He was known for his skill and his temper. He barely glanced at her when she entered. "What do you want?" he grunted, not pausing in his work. "I need to commission some tools," Alara said, laying a set of drawings on a clear space on his workbench. "And I need my grandfather's chisels retempered." Cormac stopped his hammering. He picked up the drawings. They were not crude sketches. They were precise, technical drafts, with measurements and specifications for a set of custom-made timber framing slicks and a broadaxe. He looked from the drawings to her. his expression shifting from dismissal to grudging curiosity. "Who drew these?" "I did," she said. He grunted again, a different kind of sound this time. He picked up one of her grandfather's old chisels, running a thumb over the blunted edge. "Good steel," he muttered. This was a man who knew his tools. He looked at her again, a long, steady look. "I'm busy. It'll take a week." It was not a dismissal, but an acceptance. A week later, she returned. The tools were ready, gleaming and wickedly sharp. Cormac had also retempered her grandfather's chisels, their edges restored to a razor-fine perfection. "Good tools need a good hand," he said, by way of a compliment. "You know how to use these?" "My grandfather was a stonemason," she replied simply. It was all the explanation he needed. He had seen the truth of her in the quality of her drawings and the respect she showed for the tools. From that day on, Cormac became a silent, powerful ally. When she needed iron fittings for the new roof beams, he forged them, charging her only for the cost of the iron. He respected work, and he saw in her a reflection of his own dedication to his craft. The work was slow and methodical. Alara felled trees from her own acre, squaring them into beams with her new broadaxe. She learned the rhythm of the work, the bite of the axe, the scent of the fresh-cut pine. Using a system of ropes and pulleys anchored to the sturdy stone walls, and the patient strength of Otis the mule, she hoisted the new ridge beam and rafters into place. She was not just repairing a roof, she was rebuilding her world, one beam at a time. As she worked, she became aware of another presence. High on the canyon wall, she would sometimes see a flicker of movement. It was a man, lean and weathered, who watched her from a distance. He never approached, but she felt his gaze was not hostile. It was watchful, patient. One evening, as she was cooking her meager meal over the fire, he appeared at the edge of the clearing. He was an old trapper, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes the pale, clear blue of the winter sky. He said nothing, simply held out a hand. In it were two freshly dressed rabbits. "You work hard," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "A body needs meat." "Thank you," Alara said, accepting the gift. "Name's Elias," he said. He pointed a gnarled finger at the quarry she had started, where she was chipping away at fallen stones to resize them. "That granite's tricky. It'll shear on you if you don't watch the grain. Follow the mica. It'll show you the way." He shared this piece of invaluable, hard-won knowledge as casually as if he were commenting on the weather. Then, as quietly as he had arrived, he melted back into the trees. He became another part of her new community, a silent guardian who would occasionally leave a gift of game or a bundle of edible roots, a man who respected her solitude and her labor. Months bled into a year. The small wing was now a proper, weatherproof cabin. The main basin was completely cleared, the warm, clear water steaming in the cool mountain air. Alara had begun the painstaking process of rebuilding the collapsed walls, using a lime mortar mixed according to a formula she'd found in Silas's ledger. She learned to read the stones, fitting them together like a complex puzzle. Her hands, once soft, were now strong and calloused, confident in their ability. One afternoon, a horseman rode up the trail. It was the county clerk, his curiosity having finally gotten the better of him. He had likely come to gloat, to see the foolish girl who had traded $100 for a pile of rocks. He dismounted, a smug look on his face. Then he saw it. He saw the new roof, glinting in the sun. He saw the neatly stacked piles of sorted stone and timber. He saw the clear, steaming pool and the beginnings of a new wall, rising from the ruin. He saw Alara, her face smudged with dirt but her eyes clear and steady, using her grandfather's plumb bob to true a cornerstone. The smug look on his face evaporated, replaced by slack-jawed disbelief. He had sold her a joke, and she had turned it into a testament. He stared for a long time, the silence stretching out. He had come to mock, but there were no words. Her quiet, relentless competence was a rebuke, more powerful than any shout. Without a word, he climbed back on his horse and rode away, his shoulders slumped. Alara watched him go, then turned back to her work. His opinion had never mattered. That winter came early and with a shocking ferocity. A blizzard descended on the high country, a wall of white that buried the trails and made travel impossible. Alara was prepared. Her cabin was stocked, her woodpile high. She was safe, warm in the fortress she had built. On the second day of the storm, she heard a sound through the howl of the wind, a desperate, faint shouting. She pulled on her heaviest coat and fought her way outside. Down the trail, half buried in a snowdrift, was a wagon. A family of settlers, caught in the pass on their way to the lower valleys, was stranded. The father was trying to calm his freezing, terrified children, while his wife huddled against the wind, her face pale with fear. "Come with me," Alara shouted over the storm. "There's shelter." She led them back to the bathhouse. They stared in wonder at the impossible sight. A warm, dry cabin in a huge, steaming pool of water in the middle of a frozen wilderness. She brought them inside, wrapped the children in blankets, and gave them hot broth. The father had the beginnings of frostbite on his hands and feet. Alara led him to the spring. "Put them in the water," she instructed. "It's warm. It will help." The man submerged his numb extremities in the naturally hot, mineral-rich water. The relief on his face was immediate and profound. Over the next 3 days, the bathhouse became a sanctuary. Alara shared her food, her warmth, her shelter. On the 4th day, the storm broke, and a rescue party from the town, organized by Maeve and Cormac, made its way up the canyon. They found not a scene of tragedy, but one of unexpected grace. A small community huddled safely in the heart of the storm, saved by the girl with the dollar deed and the ruin she had reclaimed. She had, without trying, fulfilled Silas Blackwood's deepest wish. She had made the place a center of healing. She was no longer an outcast. She was the quiet, unshakable heart of the canyon. With the arrival of spring, and with a portion of Silas's gold, she honored the rest of his legacy. She sent a large, anonymous donation to the county seat for the construction of a new school. She hired Cormac to forge a simple, elegant iron gate for the entrance to the bathhouse, and paid him triple his asking price. The bathhouse itself was nearly complete. The great arches were restored, the roof was finished, and the water flowed into a series of clean, beautifully crafted stone pools. It was not a business, not yet. It was a place of peace, open to any who needed it. One warm summer evening, she sat on the edge of the main pool, her feet trailing in the warm water. The setting sun cast long shadows through the arches. Cormac was there, sharing a quiet pipe with Elias. Maeve was there too, having ridden up with a basket of fresh bread, her face relaxed in a rare smile. They were not customers. They were friends, drawn together by mutual respect and the quiet gravity of the place Alara had built. She was home. Later, in her small office, the room that had once been her first desperate shelter, she lit a lamp. The light fell on a simple wooden shelf. On it sat 2 objects. One was her grandfather's plumb bob, its brass surface worn to a soft, deep glow. Its weight was familiar, comforting. It was the tool that had taught her to find the true vertical. Next to it sat a single, beautiful, uncut crystal of quartz, the size of her fist. She had found it in the chest with Silas's ledger, a personal keepsake left by the man who had walked her path a century before. It was a piece of the mountain itself, a symbol of the hidden value and rugged beauty of this place. The 2 objects, one from the man who gave her the skills, and one from the man who gave her the purpose, sat together in perfect harmony. They were the emblems of her true inheritance. She looked out the window at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, bright and clear in the mountain air. The paltry $200 from her uncle were long gone, a forgotten insult. The gold in the vault below was a comfort and a tool, but it was not the treasure. The treasure was the skill in her hands, the strength in her back, the quiet confidence in her heart. It was the knowledge that she could take a ruin and build a sanctuary, that she could face the world alone and find herself a community. The single dollar she had given to a mocking clerk for a pile of worthless rocks had bought her everything. It was, without question, the best money she ever spent.